Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you might happen to be, and welcome to the webcast. Our topic today is shareable automation, and we're going to discuss how we can effectively share automation amongst teams, among various phases within the life cycle of an application, as well as for different functional purposes like testing, documentation, compliance, and robotic process automation. A quick walkthrough of the agenda. So we are going to start with a bit of a perspective on how change management has evolved and how that continues to evolve further as we get into a more decentralized way of working. We'll then discuss what does it mean to share automation and how would you go about doing that. We'll then dive down a little bit into some more practical aspects of applying the things we talk about in change management and in shareable automation to the Agile as well as DevOps processes. We'll then broaden out and discuss a little bit more about how automation can be applied to different aspects of the entire life cycle of an application, not just testing. So what does automation look like beyond testing? And then we'll discuss some Worksoft perspectives on, what do we think and how are we structuring our solutions to keep pace with what's happening in the world and what's happening in the industry, and then how we want to innovate to serve you better, to get more automation and to get better automation for your companies. And then, of course, we'll end with a question and answer session. Please feel free to ask any question that you have about the topic, about Worksoft, about anything that you can think of. Okay, so I like to always start with a quote. I mean, I know it's a little bit cliche, but the purpose of this quote isn't to scare you or anything like that, but it's just to kind of frame a concept, right? So Gartner says, through 2020, 80% of the incidents that impact an enterprise ERP solution will arise from ineffective or absent integrated application change management processes, right? So the keyword there being integrated application change management. Now, what does that really mean, right? Can there even be such a thing as an integrated change management process? Because look, we are encouraging more decentralized, autonomous cross-functional teams to basically do what they want, right? So the new way of working, they're saying we have smaller teams, they're cross-functional, they're mostly autonomous, and then they're driving changes into production as often as they like. So what then does centralized change management even mean within that kind of environment, right? Because everyone's doing what they want to do, and you don't want to squelch automation, innovation. You want to make sure that they can, be flexible enough to do what they like, yet at the same time, you don't want things to descend into chaos, right? So that's sort of what we want to drill down into, saying, hey, everyone's doing their own thing, everything's decentralized, but there's still a certain aspect of overall change management that needs to apply throughout your company that makes sure that your core business, your critical business is not disruptive and all this is going on. Okay, so let's take a little bit about sharing, right? Let's figure out, what does it mean to share automation and what kinds of sharing you can get. So let's start across a single team, right? Let's start with sharing across individuals. So your sprint team will typically have some business functional people. They'll have software developers. It will have test and QA people. It might also have some ops people, right? People that are actually doing configurations and deployments. So within that single sprint team, you want to make sure that everybody in that team is contributing to that automation, right? In the ways that are most convenient to those people. So you want to make sure that the business functional people are making sure that the right changes and requirements are reflected in the automation. You're making sure that the developers are building automation to test the new functionality that they're building. Then you want the QA people to make sure that it's consistent and reusable and that it works properly before you move on and deploy things into production. And then you want the ops people also to take advantage of this to speed up the things that they do, right, to set up their continuous delivery pipeline. So within a team, you have different people with different roles, and you want to make sure that automation flows between them, right? So they can each contribute in the way that's convenient to them, and they can pass along their contributions from one member of the team to another, right? So think about automation like a river, like it flows through the different people within that particular team. So that's one aspect, right? Now take a look at multiple sprint teams that are contributing to a wave, and then that's being contributed to the release frame, right? So if you're looking at a scaled agile model, how would you share automation amongst the sprint teams that are doing individual sets of functionality, right? So here, the concept of a reusable automation library comes in, right? So here's where you can say, okay, for regression testing, every sprint team has access to all the automation so that when they make their changes, they ensure that the rest of it is not broken, right? So now you're taking the sharing concept within members of a single team into various sprint teams sharing the automation that they have built amongst each other so that everybody becomes more efficient as you go along. And then from there, you can also look at automation that can be reused across projects, right? So you might have different applications and different projects that are going on all at the same time, and changes within one application could impact another application, right? So you're getting into the multi-app world now where you might have a dozen, maybe 100 different applications that work together to implement some business functionality. So the goal then is, okay, how do I share automation amongst various project teams that might be, in theory, somewhat disconnected from each other, right? So how do I get the business level continuity or business level validation as application changes flow through the organization, right? So that extends that sharing from teams to projects. And then if you take it to the final level, right, you're now also sharing not just within project teams, but you're sharing automation amongst different divisions of the company, different operating units, and so on, right? And as you look at it going forwards and backwards, right, so as you go from sharing amongst individuals to teams to projects to organizations, you can see that, we've represented that as a money tree, and the ROI and the value of automation grows almost exponentially as you do that, as you go through the various levels of maturity and you start sharing automation across that whole organization. Now, this is a lot easier said than done. So we'll talk about how you can practically make this happen. But before you can make something happen, you got to think about it in this way, right? So think about the automation that you're building is getting consistently deployed and shared across your entire company, and also sometimes even outside your company with your suppliers, vendors, and so forth, right? So there is this overall strategic aspect of how large-scale automation gets deployed within organizations. And we have learned a lot through, our own deployments, which some of this we'll share later on within the webcast. Okay, so of course, right, they've been talking about automation sharing and automation flowing amongst different functional groups, amongst projects, amongst different kinds of automation. But it's also good to see that the industry is talking about the same thing also, right? So if you guys haven't looked at this, I highly recommend this report that came out recently. This is the State of DevOps report. And if you're looking at implementing Agile and DevOps, this is a really good report to go find and read. But if you look at here, what they mentioned, right, is, what's high evolution, what's medium evolution, and what's low evolution. And you can see that as you move toward the right, you have more sharing of best practices within different groups and teams, right? So within individual teams, across the organization, and outside the organization. And again, all of this sharing is facilitated by implementing automation in a consistent way, right? So when you have more high-level abstractions and when you have automation integrated with, a lot of your different systems, it then becomes progressively easier to share that and share the deployment patterns amongst the teams. Okay. So remember we talked about, what does the broad spectrum of automation look like? And here's the representation of, what we have put together, right? So don't narrow the thinking when you look at automation, right? Think about, what can automation be used for throughout your entire application lifecycle, right? So here we can start with, automating unit tests. We can automate business process documentation. We can automate the creation and the transfer of test data. We can automate functional regression testing. We can automate integration testing. We can even automate environment validation, right? The so-called config ops automation, right? So we can do automatic configurations of systems. We can make sure that the systems are available and ready. We can automate security testing, right? Role-based security. We can make sure that the right people have access to the right functionality, and then the people that are not authorized don't have access. And we can take this into production, right, where we're using this for compliance, right? So we're actually doing a lot of manual compliance-related activity that can be automated. And we can also look at automating further into robotic process automation, right? So which is automating tasks that people do manually, which are recurring tasks in production, in operations, that could be automated through the automation that you have built earlier, right? So automation, again, is now distributed back and forth through all of these functions, right? So think of it as being fluid. You build something for unit testing, fine, that might be used for integration testing. It might not. Sometimes that integration test might be used for business process testing throughout the further down in the life cycle. Sometimes the business process automation, end-to-end automation can be moved back, shifted left into the development cycle, and so on, right? So don't constrain the automation that you build for any one specific purpose, right? It's actually something that is a building block that gets added into a consistent overall library, and then those different building blocks can be used by anybody for any purpose that they can think of. And each time somebody uses it, they add more to it, and so on, right? And that's how it grows and multiplies, and you get the scaling factor, right? So instead of having only 5, 10, 20 people, even 100 people do this, you have several hundred people, maybe several thousand people actually contributing towards the automation, right? And that's how you get scale. That's how you actually really get the true ROI of automation, right? So broaden your perspective on how you're going to apply automation to all aspects of what it takes to build, configure, deploy, and run applications in your environment. Okay, so let's get a little further down into specifics on DevOps and on Agile implementations, right? And my pet peeve with DevOps has been that it's very dev focused, right? Because it evolved, in the software development side of things. I think a lot of the concerns, a lot of the way people think about DevOps is skewed towards the dev side of DevOps. But for people on this webcast, right, for us, people that are actually running very large business applications that are mission critical, the ops part and the business part are just as important, right? Probably even more so than the dev part. Because a lot of times when we buy packaged applications, someone's already built the application for us, someone's already tested it for us. So a lot of the work that's being done is how do we customize, how do we configure, how do we deploy, and then who does that, and then what are the concerns that we have to address, right? So for us, right, the audience for this particular webcast, we've got to think of DevOps a lot more than just the dev aspects of it. Let's think about the operations aspect. Let's think about the compliance aspect. Let's think about the configuration aspect. And much more importantly, right, let's think about the business aspects, right? does the business finally get the right outcomes that they're looking for through this process, right? Or are we just spinning our wheels? Because, building a lot of automation is okay, it's good, but toward what end, right? So having the right business outcomes defined, and then having the right operations, infrastructure, and processes defined is much more critical to us than, let's say, the dev side of this equation, right? And we'll talk about some of those as we move along. Okay, so a quick note on standardization, right? It helps to standardize across processes and technologies to a certain aspect, right? Standardization just means that, I've got a centralized library of assets that people can use. When I do automation, I can apply some best practices that I've learned over a period of time. Standardization doesn't mean that I'm going to stifle you and force you to do things that are cumbersome and difficult to do, right? Standardization just means that, we've been doing this for a while. We've learned a lot of things. We've learned good ways of doing this and bad ways of doing this. And so let's organize in ways that each of the individual teams can benefit from that common shared knowledge across the organization, right? So think about, for a particular purpose, standardize the right products and right technologies, standardize the right processes for that particular purpose. But then let the individual teams run those the way they see fit, right, within a loosely defined framework, right? So you don't want to become a straitjacket on the processes or on centralizing all of this. You have a distributed federated model where the idea is to share what's in your head, right? Share information more than forcing people to do things a certain way, okay? So standardization is absolutely necessary and it's important, right? But that standardization is mainly focused on best practices, on lessons learned, and to some extent on the technologies and infrastructure that's being used and run and maintained to provide certain functionality to the teams that are actually building and deploying and running your applications. Okay, so quick view on Worksoft, right? How do we kind of think about some of this, and how have we actually built this into some of our solutions, right? So what we end up doing, we said, look, the people that really understand how your business and your business processes are supposed to work are the business functional people, right? Those are your end users, your super users, your business analysts, right? So these are the people that really know how something is supposed to work, how things are supposed to happen. And so those are the people that can actually use automation to actually tell you what's in their head, right? So to transfer that knowledge from their head into the system. And if they're able to do it in a way that's not cumbersome, right? If they don't have to do something extra for that, and that makes it a lot simpler, right? So if they simply did their day job, and as they're doing their day job, all the information about that business is captured, so that now your developers, your sprint teams, and your QA organization have some set of baseline idea, requirements, description of functionality that then they're able to implement and then deploy and test properly, right? So that we automate that aspect, and that's done primarily by the business. Once you're able to visualize and document the business processes, that also generates test documentation and test automation. And then you have the more professional automation professionals, your testing and QA professionals can take over from there and say, okay, fine, I get it now. I can take this information and I know how to build reusable automation, right? So this is where your expertise comes in to say, look, how do I modularize this? How do I make sure I get the right data? How do I wrap it up in a way that it'll run 1,000 times? How do I make it so it's portable from one system to another? How do I make it so that parts of this can be shared by other projects, right? And parts of this can also be used in operations for compliance, for RPA, right? So all of those things, the thought that goes into designing your library comes in over here, right? And this is where, the automation professionals can really do more sophisticated things to then take it to the next step. And then, of course, you have the whole part of using the automation, right? Running it, deploying it into operations, scaling it up, and doing it as often as you need. Right? So this is where, what we have done is say, look, we can integrate the automation into anything, right? Any kind of change management process you can think of, whether it's an event-driven change management process, let's say via Jenkins or some other triggers, or whether it's something that runs in the background multiple times, right? Maybe it runs every day, maybe it runs multiple times a day and just happens seamlessly in the background. We can manage that, or we can, do it on demand when you need to do this or use the automation for some particular purpose, right? So the whole idea is, right, when you're looking at a solution, look at the overall broad aspects, right? And look at how people collaborate and use what you have built, right? There's no point building automation if no one can use it. It's useless, right? I mean, you could build 10,000 automated end-to-end business process tests, but if no one's running them, then they serve no purpose, right? So the focus also has to be on how easy is it to actually find it, to find the automation that you've built, right? To catalog it, to organize it, and also to use it, right? I mean, it should be really simple for me to just pull it up and run it whenever I want, or connect it to any of my change management processes and things like that. So the whole thing has to be seamless. And then that seamlessness is kind of what we are aiming toward as we continue to evolve and build our solution suite. Okay. So let's drill down a little further now into, how this will apply practically, as you are looking at your own processes within the larger, let's call them business mission critical application landscape. Okay. So this is one way of looking at, how you deal in a multi-app environment, right? So think of a drive-through versus, let's say, a food hall, right? So in a drive-through, right, you're able to sequentialize things in the way in the top picture, right? So you have cars coming in, they're lined up, and you process them one at a time, and you move them along forward, you give them what they need, and so on, right? I mean, this worked okay for a while, but this is not what you can do anymore, right? You can't sequentialize essentially your product delivery or your release cycles anymore, right? It looks a lot more like the picture below. So think of a food hall, right? Think of, several dozen what are called restaurant stalls, where each of them is essentially its own thing, right? So they're serving their own food, they're serving customers. You have a group of friends that you go in with, and they all scatter about, and they buy their own food from the different places, and then they come together again and eat it together, right? So each of those businesses functions essentially independently, but they do share common infrastructure, right? For example, the tables and chairs that are there can be used by anybody, or some of the cleaning staff, or some of the other common infrastructure, shared amongst those people, and some of the best practices, right? They might be sharing technology like, the Square credit card processing machines, or they might be buying supplies in common or whatever, right? But that's how you gotta look at it, right? So it's essentially a decentralized, chaotic appearing process where there are hundreds of people, there are dozens of different storefronts and restaurants within this food hall. I don't know if you've been to the Burroughs Market in London, or if you've been to, Legacy Hall in Plano, Texas, where I live. You can see, how this barely managed chaos functions, right? But essentially, that's kind of what you're having to deal with in your business application landscape, right? So your change management has to adopt to that mode, right? The mode where everything's independent of each other, and there are the change cycles are not coordinated amongst the applications, right? They're not lining them up like the picture above as a drive-through would, because that's just too slow, right? If you get more than 20 cars lined up, you can't move, right? It takes too long. So the change management process looks a lot more like a food hall than it does a drive-through, right? So if you go to that further down and drill down into the more technology aspect of it, right? So we have seen, like, each of the sprint teams do their own things, in which we have drawn up over here, and they're doing it for different applications, right? And they're each contributing, each of those sprint teams are contributing to the production, to production releases, and they're contributing at their own cycles, right? So remember, right, you got to look at the entire forest, right? And so, don't overlook the forest for the trees, as they say, right? So when you have change management processes, they've got to look through what happens as a whole, right? In a holistic way across all of these individual sprints and these individual applications that are feeding into production, right? But this can be rigid, right? It can be a choke point. So it's got to be more a loosely federated set of services that ensure and monitor at each point that everything is okay, almost in the background and continuously, so that things don't get disrupted as you move along this life cycle. Okay. All right. So what does that mean for change management, right? So changes are no longer centrally controlled or managed. They can't be, right? Forget about it, right? If you're thinking about, managing everything together and forcing people to do things a certain way, that's not going to happen, right? It's like damming the ocean. It doesn't work, right? So the idea there then becomes is to try to take automation and then sprinkle it across, right? So this is again the whole shareable, reusable automation concept is take your automation library and then sort of just spray it on, right? Sprinkle it across the entire organization, across teams, across everyone that's actually contributing to the application lifecycle, and then let them use that automation to make their life easier as best as they can, making sure that the technology there now is assisting in making sure that things are not broken as they move along the process. And also in the background, you're continuously monitoring changes and are testing things on the fly, if you will, right? So there's something separate from all of the different projects and sprint teams and things that are going on at a higher level, which is in the background, making sure that your critical business is not broken at all times, right? So this is something that sits independently of everything else that's going on and is making sure that end-to-end processes don't work. And then all the testing and automation cycles are mirroring everything that's going on in the organization, right? So if everything is decentralized, if all change management cycles are independent of each other, then the change management process also needs to be decentralized. Automation needs to be decentralized. Everything needs to be decentralized and work in the way change management works in an agile environment. Now, QA becomes critical now in this environment, right? Because, look, people said, look, there is no QA role now. If everything moves into a sprint and developers are pushing to production, why do we need QA? Well, you do, right? You do. The QA role has become way more significant now than ever before because somebody has to think through this, right? Somebody has to think through this strategically to say, okay, how do I organize, right? What would I do to ensure that mission critical processes work all the time? And that's the new role of QA, right? So the role becomes decentralized too, where you have people that are spread across the teams, right? So you have automation people, QA people, testing people are all sprinkled across, but somebody is thinking through that problem and making sure that it all comes together, at least at some point, so that it's not complete chaos, okay? And that new QA role is looking at a problem quite differently than how we would do that before, right? So this is, putting a finer point on this final enterprise business process assurance, right? So this is one of the white papers, from Paul Gerard, and I think he does a really good job explaining what this means, right? There is one final end thing that you have to confirm to make sure that your systems will deliver, and that confirmation occurs not at the functional level or at the unit level or the subsystem or integration testing level, but it occurs at the business level, right? So that final confirmation that your business is still working as you expect still needs to happen, right? No matter what your project teams are doing or your sprint teams or your application teams are doing, at some point in the process, you got to make sure that the business end-to-end is doing what you expect it to do. And that can be facilitated towards continuous background automation of your end-to-end critical business processes, which needs to be running pretty much all the time, right? So in this paper, right, we're handing it out as part of the webcast, so make sure and download it from your handout materials and go through it, right? I think the perspective here is really good. You know, it's something that needs to happen, but most organizations ignore this really final, last, critical step. And this is what leads to what Gartner was saying in my earlier quote, that if you don't have an effective integrated change management process, then you're going to be subject to business disrupting failures, right? So think about this final last mile, if you will, of assurance for your business across, multiple applications. Okay. Right. So we looked at, some of the things that our customers are doing and, how they're looking at implementation, right? And one way to look at it is, right, think of a two-step process here, right? So the first step is, much quicker, faster, where you have sprint teams, where you have developers are creating unit tests, atomic tests, you have stubs, containers, and you're running the automation fast, right? Within 20-minute cycles. And if you find any problems, they get reported back to the developers, right? This is happening continuously. And that is the first gate, if you will, right? So through those sprint cycles, things are being tested, things are being deployed. You have some level of impact analysis there, where you understand, what impacts do the changes that you're deploying in those applications have to your end-to-end processes. And that leads to the second queue, right? The second stage. And this second stage, this operation stage, right, is the build continuous testing, right? So this is where you're deploying all of these things into some kind of pre-production environment. And in the background, within this environment, you're doing more of the long-running end-to-end tests, right? And here, right, these things are being designed by people that understand the broader picture. And what they're doing here is making sure that they're using the right parts of your automation library to look at business continuity and business process level testing. And this is done more at a larger feature level or an end-to-end process level. And that's the second queue that then gets moved into production, right? So here orchestration is important, right? Here, scale is critical, right? Because if you don't have the right scale here, then this becomes the bottleneck. And you don't want this to become the bottleneck, because this is happening almost continuously, right? Think about everything being thrown in here and coming out on the other end are things that are passing and again continuously moving on into production, right? So this orchestration here through your whole continuous deployment, continuous integration process also takes care of the larger things, right? Like compliance, for example, or other factors that may not be things that your dev teams are considering or your sprint teams are considering, right? So we looked at it as dividing it up into two steps, right? Step one would be just building your granular functionality, and then step two would be this continuous background integration and automation process, where you're looking at the larger concerns before things get deployed into production. And also you're doing spot checks in production at all times to make sure that if things got through, you can still catch them before your customers do. Okay. So let's discuss a little bit about, going beyond just test automation. So when you're building automation for testing, what else can you do with it, right? So for us, right, if you looked at the broad spectrum of things that we look at and that I discussed throughout the presentation so far, right, you look at the three buckets of it, right? The business process knowledge, automation creation, execution, and optimization, right? So that automating process discovery and documentation, generating the automation from that, and then creating the reusable modularized component that then feed into the library. Right? So that's the whole business process knowledge and automation creation vertical. Once you have that library, then that feeds into process assurance, robotic process automation, compliance, as well as disaster recovery validation. Right? So all those functional elements, each of them are equal, right? So business process assurance, of course, you gotta do that. Otherwise, you can't deploy your applications. RPA gives you another level of efficiency and optimization that feeds into that overall business case. You have compliance, that's another big task that everyone has to do that automation can be applied towards. And then, of course, you have disaster recovery and DR validation that have to be done on a periodic basis, which also automation can be applied to, right? So all of those functions can then use your common automation library and those common components across those functions. And then you optimize the automation, right, for risk reduction, for project acceleration, for quality improvements, and for overall ROI. And so, again, right, a lot of these things that I'm talking about, right, they're not just theoretical concepts or things that we have thought up and are putting up in pretty PowerPoint pictures. That's not the case. Right? We have deployed this in production with very large customers, right? So we've had, we've worked with IDC to actually do measurements of applying some of these concepts over multiple years, right? And to see what kind of benefits people got out of it, right? And the benefits are dramatic, right? Think about this, right? 83% less time, right, to test business processes, 61% faster to create automation, right? Almost 25% reduction in project deployment cycles and how long it takes to actually complete projects, right? Think about the additional revenue aspects, right? So this is a new thing, right? This is something that's interesting because we always think about things from the perspective of saving time or saving money from speeding up projects or reducing people time, right? But what about business benefits, right? So if you are able to deploy functionality faster, then the ROI that's associated with that particular functionality comes faster, right? So you have ways to measure additional revenue impacts of doing things in a more optimized, better way, which IDC measured for our customers at $3.55 million, right? So all of this adds up, and then this report, right? So again, this IDC ROI report is another one I recommend that you guys download and read, and it's available in your handout materials, right? Go take a look at it, right? And again, this all makes it real. It's not that we say do this. We've had people that have done it and have done it in various ways, and we have measured, what did they get out of it, and of course, all of these things can be really, really dramatic and help you quite a bit. Okay. So now getting into the people and process part of this, right? So we've talked about this automation COE concept or testing COE concept, and some of those things have sound old-fashioned a little bit now. Center of excellence. What does that mean, right? Is it a large bloated organization that becomes a bottleneck? But that's not how it's working for us, for customers in the field, right? So this becomes much more flexible and federated, right? So again, like I talked about before, the way this works is that you have, best practices that are shared, you have assets that are shared, and then you have people that are shared, right? This is critical, right? So you have your automation experts, and this doesn't have to be, a very large group, but you send them, right? You ship them over to the project teams, and they work together with them to get them going, right? So this becomes a federated model where it's not just a centralized team sitting somewhere and telling people what to do, but they actually go into the different sprint teams, the different projects, and they actually help out within the point where you're actually doing things. And when they're done, they have transferred their expertise over to those teams, which then internalize it and do more and so on. And then they move on to the next project, and so on, right? So again, they're looking at all of this in a very decentralized, federated way where people from the the center of competence, if you will, right? The COC for automation or the COC for QA are kind of distributed across multiple teams, and they are managing some of the centralized infrastructure, the technology, the products that are required to do this. And they're also cataloging and managing the reusable assets, which greatly accelerate the automation creation aspects for the project teams, okay? So a quick, real world example, right? So this is another thing that's available in your handout. Go read it, right? So Cardinal Health, it's a customer that has really taken this to heart and are implementing agile processes where the business is involved, the developers are involved, QA is involved, everybody's involved, right? So what they're saying is, testing center of excellence should be geared towards mission critical applications focused on your most vital projects. And what they're saying is automation is everyone's job, right? Automation isn't relegated to 3 or 4 or 5 quote unquote automation experts. It's everyone's job, right? So they created a COE. They also took people from the COE and started distributing them to the project teams. They soon realized that the automation that they were building for testing, for configuring and deploying the applications could also be used for robotic process automation, right? A fringe side benefit. And so they started using that automation and telling the business, hey, look, the stuff we are doing can actually make your life a lot easier for all these manual things that you do, right? All that stuff we can automate along the way, right? They also consolidated, a lot of their automation from different products into Worksoft Certify, and they use the front end process discovery and documentation to really understand what's going on and how they wanted to not just implement technology, but to restructure their entire business processes to become more efficient, right? So all of this transparency and the automation creation helps them understand how they're doing things and where they might actually be able to completely eliminate activities that are unproductive, right? So this goes much more than just doing things faster, but it goes into a reimagination of what's possible, and then how would you think about your business a lot differently, right? So think about all of those aspects, bringing it all together. I encourage you to download the case study that we have put up for this. Look at the videos, look at some of the presentations that these guys have done. They've done a great job at it, and they're continuing to, build and expand on what they've done. Right. So let's get now into, what does that mean for Worksoft as a company and our product, right? What do we do to continue to build upon this trend, this evolution, this decentralized change management, this importance of using automation throughout the life cycle? What do we do, right? So what we are looking at is, 3 different aspects, right? We want it to be absolutely easy and simple to create automation, right? We want anybody to be able to do it, right? So the relentless focus that we have is ease of use, right? We want our products to be accessible to pretty much anybody that wants to build automation, and we want that building of automation to be quick, right? So everything that we can automate in building the automation, call it automating the automation, right? We want to do it, make it really simple, easy to create the automation, right? We want it to be easy to scale, right? This is critical, right? Because you're going to have to run the automation really fast, right? Which means you have to distribute that automation across a number of machines, and you have to be much more cognizant of, not having time to really do it sequentially, right? So this large scale parallel execution is really important, right? So the scale aspect is something that we have put a lot of effort into, from completely re-architecting our products to do the scale, as well as building features and functionality that are specifically geared towards that scale, right? And last but not least, remember, automation needs to be sprinkled across everything that you do. So we want to make sure that our products are really simple to integrate with all kinds of things, right? application lifecycle management products, change management solutions, Jenkins, Jira, you name it, right? We want to make sure that when you build Worksoft automation, you can use it anywhere with anything, right? So we're going to continue to build out a really large ecosystem of complementary solutions where we are fully integrated into those out of the box, so that you don't have to change the way that you do things, right? You have things already working and functional. We're just going to make them better, faster, and cheaper for you to do through the automation, right? So use automation as and how you are innovating and applying your own processes, right? So three things for us, right? Easy to build and create the automation, easy to scale, and easy to integrate, right? That's what drives our product roadmap. So drilling down a little further to a second level of this, right? The first part is important for us, right? So again, like I said before, right? With the Cardinal Health use case and other use cases, right? If we use automation to truly foster collaboration and sharing amongst various functional groups, amongst projects, amongst the whole company, then automation becomes transformative, right? It changes the way you do business, not just speeding up or tinkering around the edges, right? It actually really redefines how you do things, and that's what we're shooting for, right? We want our automation to be used in a way that transforms the business, that transforms the business processes, that transforms what companies do, right? We want to be collaborative, right? This is critical. We've always said that we want to break down traditional silos, right? And make sure that everybody contributes to the process, right? The business contributes, QA contributes, developers contribute, operations people contribute, compliance people contribute, everyone contributes to the process. We want to be continuous, right? We want this automation to be running all the time, right? Because if you don't run it all the time, you don't run it at the same pace as you're applying changes, then it doesn't work. It's not effective, right? So you want to make sure that we are providing you a solution that can be run continuously all the time, right? You want to make sure that the automation is extendable across any devices, any platforms, any browsers, whatever it is that you use on your business. And then last but not least, right, we're also looking at artificial intelligence and machine learning to constantly update the automation, right? So here's the thing, right? Automation itself is not static, right? If your applications are not static, your business processes are not static, your innovation is continuous, then of course automation has to be changing continuously, right? And that becomes cumbersome if you don't pay attention to that, right? So what we want to do is use AI and machine learning to automatically repair the automation, automatically understand changes in business processes, and recreate or fix the automation, right? So we want to make sure that just as everything in your organization is a living, breathing, growing, innovating machine, the automation adjusts to it, right? And the automation adjusts continuously as everything adjusts, as your applications adjust, as your processes adjust, as your company adjusts. And so we come to the end, and I wanted to plug our customer conference. I'd encourage everyone to attend. We're going to be drilling a lot deeper into a lot of the things I talked about. We'll have an RPA track, robotic process automation track. We'll have a digital transformation track. We'll be doing a lot of sessions on Agile and DevOps, testing for CI/CD. So, and also it's going to be a lot of fun, and a great networking event, right? So if you can, try and make it to our customer conference. That's going to be March 4th through 7th in Dallas. And you can register now on the website.